File 27.
Chapter 13. A Sight I Shall Never Forget. Just as the sun was setting upon that melancholy night, I saw the lonely figure of the Indian upon the vast plain beneath me, and I watched him, our one faint hope of salvation, until he disappeared in the rising mists of evening, which lay, rose-tinted from the setting sun, between the far-off river and me. It was quite dark when I at last turned back to our stricken camp, and my last vision as I went was the red gleam of Zambo's fire, the one point of light in the wide world below, as was his faithful presence in my own shadowed soul. And yet I felt happier than I had done since this crushing blow had fallen upon me, for it was good to think that the world should know what we had done, so that at the worst our names should not perish with our bodies, but should go down to posterity associated with the results of our labours. It was an awesome thing to sleep in that ill-fated camp, and yet it was even more unnerving to do so in the jungle. One or other it must be. Prudence, on the one hand, warned me that I should remain on guard, but exhausted nature, on the other, declared that I should do nothing of the kind. I climbed up onto a limb of the great ginkgo tree, but there was no secure perch on its rounded surface, and I should certainly have fallen off and broken my neck the moment I began to doze. I got down, therefore, and pondered over what I should do. Finally, I closed the door of the zareba, lit 3 separate fires in a triangle, and having eaten a hearty supper, dropped off into a profound sleep, from which I had a strange and most welcome awakening. In the early morning, just as day was breaking, a hand was laid upon my arm, and starting up, with all my nerves in a tingle, and my hand feeling for a rifle, I gave a cry of joy, as in the cold grey light I saw Lord John kneeling beside me. It was he, and yet it was not he. I had left him calm in his bearing, correct in his person, prim in his dress. Now he was pale and wild-eyed, gasping as he breathed like one who has run far and fast. His gaunt face was scratched and bloody, his clothes were hanging in rags, and his hat was gone. I stared in amazement, but he gave me no chance for questions. He was grabbing at our stores all the time he spoke. "Quick, young fella, quick!" he cried. "Every moment counts. Get the rifles, both of them. I have the other 2. Now all the cartridges you can gather. Fill up your pockets. Now some food. 6 tins will do. That's all right. Don't wait to talk or think. Get a move on or we're done." Still half awake, and unable to imagine what it all might mean, I found myself hurrying madly after him through the wood, a rifle under each arm, and a pile of various stores in my hands. He dodged in and out through the thickest of the scrub, until he came to a dense clump of brushwood. Into this he rushed, regardless of thorns, and threw himself into the heart of it, pulling me down by his side. "There," he panted. "I think we're safe here. They'll make for the camp, sure as fate. It'll be their first idea. But this should puzzle them." "What is it all?" I asked, when I had got my breath. "Where are the professors? And who is it that is after us?" "The ape-men!" he cried. "Oh, my God, what brutes! Don't raise your voice, for they have long ears. Sharp eyes, too, but no power of scent, so far as I could judge, so I don't think they can sniff us out. Where have you been, young fella? You were well out of it. In a few sentences I whispered what I had done. Pretty bad, said he, when he had heard of the dinosaur and the pit. It isn't quite the place for a rest cure, what? But I had no idea what its possibilities were until those devils got hold of us. The man-eating Papuans had me once, but they're Chesterfields compared to this crowd. How did it happen? I asked. Well, it was in the early morning. Our learned friends were just stirring. Hadn't even begun to argue yet. Suddenly it rained apes. They came down thick as apples out of a tree. They'd been assembling in the dark, I suppose, until that great tree over our heads was heavy with them. I shot one of them through the belly, but before we knew where we were, they had us spread-eagled on our backs. Well, I call them apes, but they carried sticks and stones in their hands and jabbered talk to each other, and ended up by tying our hands with creepers. So they're ahead of any beast I've seen in my wanderings. Ape-men, that's what they are. Missing links, and I wish they'd stayed missing. They carried off their wounded comrade, he was bleeding like a pig, and then they sat around us, and if ever I saw frozen murder, it was in their faces. They were big fellows, as big as a man and a deal stronger. Curious glassy grey eyes they have, under red tufts. They just sat and gloated. Challenger's no chicken, but even he was cowed. He managed to struggle onto his feet and yelled out at them to have done with it and get it over. I think he'd gone a bit off his head at the suddenness of it, for he raged and cursed at them like a lunatic. If they'd been a row of his favourite pressmen, he couldn't have slanged them worse. Well, what did they do? I was enthralled by the strange story which my companion was whispering into my ear, while all the time his keen eyes were shooting in every direction, and his hand grasping his cocked rifle. I thought it was the end of us, but instead of that it started them on a new line. They all jabbered and chattered together. Then one of them stood out beside Challenger. You will smile, young fellow, but upon my word they might have been kinsmen. I couldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. This old ape-man, he was their chief, was a sort of red Challenger, with every one of our friend's beauty points, only just a trifle more so. He had the short body, the big shoulders, the round chest, no neck, a great ruddy frill of a beard, the tufted eyebrows, the what do you want, damn you, look about his eyes. Oh, the whole catalogue. When the ape-man stood by Challenger and put his paw on his shoulder, the thing was complete. Summerlee was a bit hysterical, and he laughed till he cried. The ape-men laughed too, or at least they put up the devil of a cackling, and then they set to work to drag us off through the forest. They wouldn't touch the guns and things, thought them dangerous, I expect, but they carried away all our loose food. Summerlee and I got some rough handling on the way. There's my skin and my clothes to prove it, for they took us a beeline through the brambles, and their own hides are like leather. But Challenger was all right. 4 of 'em carried him shoulder high, and he went like a Roman emperor. What's that? It was a strange clicking noise in the distance, not unlike castanets. "There they go," said my companion, slipping cartridges into the second double-barrelled Express. "Load 'em all up, young fellow, my lad, for we're not going to be taken alive, and don't you think it. That's the row they make when they're excited. By George, they'll have something to excite 'em if they put us up. The last stand of the Greys won't be in it. with their rifles grasped in their stiffened hands mid a ring of the dead and dying, as some fathead sings. Can you hear them now? Well, very far away. That little lot'll do no good, but I expect their search parties are all over the wood. Well, I was telling you my tale of woe. They got us soon to this town of theirs, about 1,000 huts of branches and leaves and a great grove of trees near the edge of the cliff. It's 3 or 4 miles from here. The filthy beasts fingered me all over, and I feel as if I should never be clean again. They tied us up. The fellow who handled me could tie like a bosun, and there we lay with our toes up beneath a tree, while a great brute stood guard over us with a club in his hand. When I say we, I mean Summerlee and myself. The old Challenger was up a tree, eating pines and having the time of his life. I'm bound to say that he managed to get some fruit to us, and with his own hands he loosened our bonds. If you'd seen him sitting up in that tree, hobnobbing with his twin brother, and singing in that rolling bass of his, "Ring out, wild bells," 'cause music of any kind seemed to put him in a good humour, you'd have smiled. But we weren't in much mood for laughing, as you can guess. They were inclined, within limits, to let him do what he liked, but they drew the line pretty sharply at us. It was a mighty consolation to us all to know that you were running loose and had the archives in your keeping. Well, now, young fella, I'll tell you what will surprise you. You say you saw signs of men and fires, traps and the like. Well, we've seen the natives themselves. Poor devils they were, down-faced little chaps, and had enough to make 'em so. It seems the humans hold one side of this plateau, over yonder where you saw the caves, and the ape-men hold this side, and there's bloody war between them all the time. Well, that's the situation as far as I could follow it. Well, yesterday the ape-men got hold of 12 of the humans and brought 'em in as prisoners. You never heard such a jabbering and shrieking in your life. The men were little red fellows and had been bitten and clawed so they could hardly walk. The ape-men put 2 of them to death there and then, fairly pulled the arm off one of them. It was perfectly beastly. Plucky little chaps they are, and hardly gave a squeak, but it turned us absolutely sick. Summerlee fainted, and even Challenger had as much as he could stand. I think they've cleared, don't you? We listened intently, but nothing save the calling of the birds broke the deep peace of the forest. Lord John went on with his story. I think you've had the escape of your life, young fellow, my lad. It was catching those Indians that put you clean out of their heads, else they would have been back to the camp for you, sure as fate, and gathered you in. Of course, as you said, they've been watching us from the beginning out of that tree, and they knew perfectly well that we were one short. However, they could think only of this new haul. So it was I, and not a bunch of apes, that dropped in on you in the morning. We had a horrid business afterwards. My God, what a nightmare the whole thing is. You remember the great bristle of sharp canes down below where we found the skeleton of the American? Well, that's just under Ape Town, and that's the jumping-off place of their prisoners. I expect there's heaps of skeletons there if we look for 'em. They have a sort of clear parade ground on the top, and they make a proper ceremony about it. One by one the poor devils have to jump, and the game is to see whether they are merely dashed to pieces or whether they get skewered on the canes. They took us out to see it, and the whole tribe lined up on the edge. 4 of the Indians jumped, and the canes went through 'em like knitting needles through a pat of butter. No wonder we found that poor Yankee's skeleton with the canes growing between his ribs. Oh, it was horrible, but it was deucedly interesting, too. We were all fascinated to see them take the dive, even when we thought it'd be our turn next on the springboard. Well, it wasn't. They kept 6 of the Indians up for today. Well, that's how I understood it. But I fancy we were to be the star performers in the show. Challenger might get off, but Summerlee and I were in the bill. Their language is more than half signs, and it wasn't too hard to follow them. So I thought it was time we made a break for it. I'd been plotting it out a bit and had 1 or 2 things clear in my mind. It was all on me, for Summerlee was useless and Challenger not much better. The only time they got together they got slanging, because they couldn't agree upon the scientific classification of these red-headed devils that had got hold of us. One said it was the Dryopithecus of Java, and the other said it was Pithecanthropus. Oh, madness, I call it. Loonies, both. But as I say, I had thought out 1 or 2 points that were helpful. One was that these brutes couldn't run as fast as a man in the open. They have short, bandy legs, you see, and heavy bodies. Even Challenger could give a few yards in 100 to the best of them, and you or I would be a perfect shrub. Another point was that they knew nothing about guns. I don't believe they ever understood how the fellow I shot came by his hurt. If we could get at our guns, there was no saying what we could do. So I broke away early this morning, gave my guard a kick in the tummy that laid him out, and sprinted for the camp. There I got you and the guns, and here we are." "But the professors!" I cried in consternation. "Well, we must just go back and fetch 'em. I couldn't bring 'em with me. Challenger was up the tree, and Summerlee wasn't fit for the effort. The only chance was to get the guns and try a rescue. Of course, they may scupper them at once in revenge. I don't think they'd touch Challenger, but I wouldn't answer for Summerlee. But they would have had him in any case. Of that I'm certain. So I haven't made matters any worse by bolting. But we are honour bound to go back and have them out, or see it through with them. So you can make up your soul, young fellow my lad, for it'll be one way or the other before evening." I have tried to intimate here Lord Roxton's jerky talk, his short, strong sentences, the half-humorous, half-reckless tone that ran through it all. But he was a born leader. As danger thickened, his jaunty manner would increase. His speech became more racy, his cold eyes glitter into ardent life, and his Don Quixote moustache bristle with joyous excitement. His love of danger, his intense appreciation of the drama of an adventure, all the more intense for being held tightly in, his consistent view that every peril in life is a form of sport, a fierce game betwixt you and fate, with death as a forfeit, made him a wonderful companion at such hours. If it were not for our fears as to the fate of our companions, it would have been a positive joy to throw myself with such a man into such an affair. We were rising from our brushwood hiding-place, when suddenly I felt his grip upon my arm. "By George!"